Welcome to the second in the series of 5 webinars presented by Informs to help people prepare for the CAP exam by providing more information on the topics included in this program. This presentation will be available after today, just as the first webinar in the series is currently available for listening. The next that will be talking about Domain 3, the data domain, will be presented in January 7th. If you have questions during the presentation, you can post them. We'll answer as many as we can, and others will be answered offline. And if you think of a question later, just send it to certification@informs.org. It gets to me. I am the manager of certification. Our presenter today is Frank Stein, not Frank Schultz, as it says on your screen. I don't believe he's ever been Frank Schultz, but he is Frank Stein. He's director of IBM's Analytic Solutions Center here in Washington, and he spent most of his career in R&D, the last 14 years at IBM, where he not only works with the Analytic Solutions Center and the Federal Innovation Solutions Centers, but he helped create them both. And from that position, he works with government, industry, and the academic community on the application of analytics and big data to mission and business problems. Frank's also part of IBM's team working with customers Watson and his or her or its cognitive computing solutions. Frank's an invited speaker worldwide, has published widely on a range of topics, is co-author of the book Business Analytics, An Introduction, and holds at least 3 patents, is also the recipient of the IBM Nick D'Onofrio Award for Innovation. He has degrees from Carnegie Mellon, Stanford, and George Washington University, so I'm certain he knows his way around an exam. I'm sure he's taken more than 1 or 2. And to top it all off, Frank is a CAP and has written a portion of the CAP study guide. So Frank, would you care to present domains 1 and 2, business problem framing and analytics problem framing?
Sure, it'd be my pleasure, Louise, and welcome everybody to this webcast here. I was in your boat a little over a year ago as I was preparing for the CAP test, and I do want to give you the value of my experience, and I'll take you through today some background on CAP, give you some of the substance around domains 1 and 2, and then we can answer some questions and talk more generally about the test if you'd like. Okay, with that, let me see if I can bring up a vote here. And here we go. So here's your first question. When do you plan to seek the CAP? Press A for first quarter of 2015, B for second quarter of 2015, C for after that in the second half of 2015 later, or if you're not planning on seeking the CAP, please press D. Okay, it looks like most of you are planning on doing it in the first quarter, so that's great, and hopefully this will help you to do that. Okay, so let's get right into the material. When we started the CAP work, we started by doing a job task analysis of what typical professionals do in their job around analytics. We looked at the various domains of these professionals, the tasks that they performed, and the knowledge that they needed to know to do these tasks. You'll see in some of these slides a K and various numbers, and those are the knowledge areas that we found when we were doing these. And this first slide here, you can see some of the domains that we're talking about. The CAP exam is designed to test your knowledge in this area, It's not designed to be all-inclusive, and it's not designed to be theoretical. It's actually a very practical test. Here's the information on the first two domains, as well as the percentages on the others for the test. And you'll see that the first two domains account for roughly 1/3 of the test. So if you feel comfortable with the material here, you know you've got a good chance at getting at least a 33% on the exam. And the other ones you'll see when you go through those webinars are not particularly hard either. So I hope to encourage you to take the test, and I think you'll find it to be an interesting experience, and for some of you, just a review. Okay, so here's domain 1, and the goal of the first domain, business problem framing, is to understand the business problem that the business has, that your client has if you're an external consultant, or if you're an internal consultant, the internal client that you have, and determine whether the problem is amenable to an analytic solution. The 1 through 6 here are the subtasks, and we're going to go into each of those in more detail on the coming slides. From the task statements here, we can derive the knowledge or the skills that are needed. Overall, we've identified 7 knowledge areas, but this task here relates to 5 of those knowledge areas, the K1 through 5. Task 1 is to obtain or review or receive the problem statement and the usability requirements. And this is where we're getting to really the heart of the matter around the CAP. As a professional, your first step will be to understand the business problem of your clients or constituents. The key, we don't start with the tools or the techniques or the capabilities. We start with the business problem. There are various ways to ferret out the business problem, and various employees of the client may have differing views of the problem, but it's your job to sort through all those views and to come up with a consensus on what the real problem is before you move forward. The task 2 here is around identifying the stakeholders. We all recognize that one of the most important elements for project success is to properly identify and to work with the key stakeholders. The next page discusses some of those subtasks needed. Stakeholder analysis. Who are the key people that you need to be interfacing with? Can you get an org chart? Can you go through and find out who are the people that are going to be sponsoring your project? Who are the people that really know the details of your project? Are there any personnel issues that you need to be aware of? And finally, communications. You need to clearly communicate. One of the real skills that is learned over time, I think, as a professional, is the ability to communicate with people at all different levels in the organization and in all different ways that they need to be communicated. So these are all important issues and something you need to think about as you start working on the project. Next, we have the task 3 of determining if the problem is amenable to analytic solution. And here you can see a couple of breakouts. And we want to answer this problem before we start spending the client's money or a lot of time on our part as well. If it's something that's more of a political question or something that you don't think that there's data to actually solve, it's better to find that kind of thing up front now. So here are some questions to help determine that answer. In my experience, data has been the big issue. Can we get our hands on the necessary data? Is the data valid? And is it good enough, clean enough that we can use it? Can we clean it up so that it works? And do we have enough of that data so that we can actually use it as the basis for a model? Now, there'll be an upcoming webinar just focused on data, but that's one of the aspects here that you need to be looking at. Other ones include, is it within the client's control? That is, if you did this model, could the client even do anything about it? And is there a problem that can be modeled? And the ones near the end, will the answer be acceptable? Can the answer be deployed? Really relate to what the client might do with your answer. Will they consider it? Will they actually use it? Can they act upon it or not? Okay, the next one here is to refine the problem statement and delineate the constraints. Characteristics of a business problem statement, interviewing, modeling options, and the resources are all the knowledge areas that relate to that. So once we decide on that the business problem could be approached with an analytic solution, we need to refine the problem statement to help us with the analytics process. And here are some of the ways that we can refine the problem statement. Can we modify the problem to make it more accurately reflect the views of all the stakeholders? What are the constraints that we have to deal with? It might be great if we had real-time data, but if we only can get data that's a week old on the inventory, is that good enough to make the solution useful? How much money or how much time does the client wish to devote to this project? All of us that are in the consulting side of the world know that clients would love you to do a lot of sophisticated analysis, but sometimes they just haven't budgeted for that, either in terms of time or resources that is help for you, or even dollars. So you have to be aware of all these constraints as you start working on your project. There we go. Task 5 is to define an initial set of business benefits. This is sometimes called the business case. Before delving into the solution, can you quantify what the benefit, or what sometimes we call the upside, might be from developing an analytical solution? From the client's perspective, this might help them obtain funding to start the project, and we will a lot of times work to make sure that the client has the information they need to convince their management chain to fund their projects. But from our perspective, it's also very important because it helps us to decide how sophisticated or how advanced of a solution to propose and how we should price it. Okay, the next task here is to define an initial, I think I did that one, didn't I? The initial set of business things. Task 6 here is to, I'm not sure whether I had 2 number 5s here or not here. Anyway, I think we covered this piece, so let's go on to the next one. 6, obtain the shareholder agreement on the problem statement. This is very important. We need to get agreement with all the stakeholders on the problem we're going to work on, the expected business benefits, and so forth before we proceed any further. At the end of this phase, we need to have an agreement on the project objectives, the initial approach, and the estimated time and resources to get there. So sometimes we'll have to redefine the problem a little bit because we've learned some things as part of this process that we need to modify. And we may even have to iterate on it a number of times before we get to something that we and the customer can all agree on before moving it forward. Okay, so that takes us to the end of Domain 1. I hope it looks pretty simple to you. I think it's pretty straightforward. I do want to sort of emphasize that this is a very important step. You will get some questions someplace, I'm sure, in the TAP that ask you about what's most important. And in my opinion, and I think the right results for those kind of questions are that unless you can get the problem right, the work on the solution doesn't matter. So, many projects that we've worked on have failed, not because we did a bad job on the work, but because we didn't answer the right problem. We didn't understand the customer's problem fully. Okay, are there any questions on this part, on the domain 1? Okay, so we'll next go on to domain 2. And this shows you the different tasks that are in domain 2. So this domain is all about moving from the business problem towards the solution. We defined 5 tasks within the domain, which we'll discuss on the following pages, as before. So here's task 1. The first step is to convert the business problem statement into an analytics problem. Since you've worked on developing the problem statement formulation, you should have a good handle on what it means by now. But how do you translate the what of the business problem into the how of the analytics? And that's what we'll cover now. This is where your knowledge of analytic techniques comes into play. What does the client want to achieve? Who are the actors? Who are going to be the users of the system? What data might be available? What data is needed? What outputs would the analytics engine or black box need to provide to be useful to the client organization? At IBM, we use the acronym CPA. What data do you want to capture is the C, the capturing of the data. Secondly, what do you want to predict or otherwise model? So that's the P. And finally, what actions would the organization take as a result of this? So try to remember CPA as you start thinking about doing this reformulation of the business statement into an analytics. Okay, so task 2 here is about developing a proposed set of drivers and relationships to the output. And this is where you start defining the inputs and the outputs for the problem. What are the outputs that we'll need to accomplish the business problem? What are the inputs that might predict or impact these outputs? As an analytics professional, you'll want to explain these inputs and a general sense of their predicted results to the stakeholders and to your team. There's a number of ways you can do this. The study guide shows you some tables, for example, where you can map the various inputs to the various outputs. This is not getting to the modeling level as much as getting to the fact that these various inputs may be independent variables that could affect or predict the output. And you'll want to get agreement with the team there that they agree with, in fact, your analysis and agree with the outputs as well as possible inputs there. Okay, task 3 is to state the set of assumptions related to the problem. It is important to clearly list your project assumptions and to obtain agreement on these assumptions. Many times your client subject matter experts, or SMEs, are so immersed in their own work and their own work area that they believe that everybody else can understand the tacit assumptions that they are making and the constraints and the bounds based upon their information. And that's not usually the case. So one of your jobs as a professional is to ask them enough questions so that you can get to the assumptions that they've made in the story that they've been telling you. Assumptions have been made by the stakeholders, all the stakeholders, and some of these they will state to you, others they'll have made, but they won't realize that they've actually even been making that. It's your job to elicit these assumptions through probing questions and an understanding of their problem. Similarly, you will make assumptions as you start the analytics development process. It is best practice to explicitly list all of your assumptions, some of which will bound the applicability of the model you are contemplating. It is also a good idea to list all the known risks and the uncertainties associated with your project. Okay, task 4 is to define the key metrics of success. How will you know if the project is successful? What are the key performance indicators that can be measured to show success? The metrics should be agreed to by the team and then published along with the method for how you will do the measurements. One caution is that we too often will decide on the metrics that are easy to measure rather than the metrics that are actually meaningful. And how many times have you all seen this, that we collect lots of data, but the data actually isn't meaningful and isn't a good indicator of success? Okay, number 5. Here we want to obtain the stakeholder agreement on the revised problem statement. Although you've been working with the client team all along, now is the time to go back to the stakeholders to walk them through your analytics approach, all of the assumptions you've acquired, the assumptions that you're making, the key metrics that you are recommending, as well as the project tasks like the project plan, the timeline, the phases, and the scope. A successful project requires a clear understanding from both sides as to what is to be done. The end of the phase is the time to make sure that you've got their agreement before you want to proceed to the next stage. So you're going to go back and you're going to revise your problem statement. You're going to provide this additional information that you've acquired as you've tried to reframe it as an analytics problem, and you're going to present this and hold a checkpoint meeting to assure that you're all on the same page. And this is the end of the second domain. Any questions on that? Okay. Next, we'll go into some more general material about the CAP. As I said, I did the CAP a year ago. I, like you, was probably nervous about it. I was nervous about it. I presume that you were also nervous about it. And I found that some of these points on this page were useful. You don't need to take a whole college course again to do this. My degrees are many decades old, and although I've worked in the field, it is necessary to do some refreshing, particularly of the things that you haven't used in quite a while. We started a study group, and we assigned each person in the group a responsibility to provide a tutorial on one portion of the domains. I think it helped. And I'd encourage you to consider forming a group and doing something similar. I didn't find the test to be particularly hard, but I did find that I did need to study, and I did need to review things that I hadn't used in a long time. Particularly my probability and statistics was not where it should have been, because the work that I do doesn't directly involve that most times. Okay, I see we have another question, so let me check with the questions before we go on here. Okay, one of the questions was somebody's not hearing something. I hope that's been resolved. If not, put another question in, but I'll assume that that's been resolved. The second question here is that there are a lot of analytic techniques and solutions for a problem. How do you weigh and decide among them? That's true. There are a lot of different techniques, and it'll be your job to understand what type of problem you're facing and how you might approach it. For example, if the company or your client says something about that they need to maximize their throughput or minimize their costs, you might immediately decide that this is an optimization problem. For other kind of things, you may want to develop a scoring algorithm or a predictive model. And some of the needs may be, pretty straightforward and be more like a business intelligence kind of solution where you need to collect the data and slice it and dice it and present results. So one of the things you will have to be familiar with is the different types of techniques. And then within those different things like predictive modeling, of course, there's a number of different approaches to predictive modeling. And which ones are the right ones to use? Do you want to do machine learning supervised or unsupervised? Do you have enough information or data to do a supervised learning, for example? And as professionals, those are kind of things that we need to know the answers to. The CAP test itself won't actually test those individual, the details on that. They will ask you questions that are generally around to make sure that you understand the meaning of supervised versus unsupervised, but you won't be asked to actually solve one problem or the other. Okay, another question came in. Let's say there's a statistical classification problem, and you can use either a logic or a decision tree or a neural network. How do you choose? That's a whole topic for a seminar in itself. I think that there's lots of different ways to decide which is the best approach. I don't think that the test will ask you, which of these techniques or clustering or classification techniques, but I don't think that they'll make you to decide one versus the other. But you may want to think about that and actually build yourself a little table as you do the preparations. The next question that came in, any suggestions for other relevant practice questions other than the ones currently available online? We did make up some other practice questions because some of us had various books, and so we took some general high-level questions from the books and then made sure that we had sort of answers for that. I think that the study guide does provide you with a pretty good example between that and the handbook of the types of things that you need to know. I don't think you need, the next question here is the references are quite expensive. Any suggestions or perhaps other relevant references that are much less than $200? I don't think you need to buy the references. I think there's enough material online. I think the level of the testing is probably at the level that Wikipedia and other PDFs that are online are sufficient. I didn't buy any new books to do this. Okay, so let me go back to the next slides here, and then if you have more questions, we can go there. Okay, we're not trying to test your knowledge of any particular software. We're not trying to test knowledge of, where do we get to here? Of various vendors. We're not trying to test everything. The goal is to make sure that you're a capable and competent analytics professional, and I think the test does that. So I don't think you have to be afraid of the test. You are given a calculator, if I remember correctly, but the calculations aren't long, involved calculations. You certainly don't need a computer to do anything that's there, and they don't ask you questions like, is this a legitimate Java statement, or is this a legitimate SQL statement? So the goal is not to actually test your knowledge of the syntax associated with programming. Okay, preparation resources. We just mentioned the CAP study guide, the candidate handbook, these webinars. There are some continuing education classes. There's other things that are out there on the web. I have a number of webinars out there as well, or PDF files at www.ibm.com/ASCDC, and I'm sure there's lots of others from other companies as well that you can find. Okay. So before we get into some sample test questions, here's some hints. I think this is all sort of standard test-taking advice. If you've taken an SAT before, or GRE before, or GMAT, or any of the other standardized tests, I think you know how to deal with these. Make sure that you manage your time wisely. Most of us left before the exam time closed, so I don't think that it's one of these tests that you have to hurry through. On the other hand, there were some questions that I had no clue of. Luckily, you don't need to have 100% to do this, and worst case, you'll miss some problems. And I think in some cases, later questions also gave me hints that I then went back and revised some other questions. Okay, so here's a question. In the initial project meeting with a client, which of the following is the most important information to obtain? A, timeline and implementation plan. B, analytical model to use. C, budget issue and project goal. And D, available budget. And here we'll put up another vote. And we'll start your voting now. So take a minute to read the question again and then provide your answers. And I'll give you a little bit to review that. And then we'll take a look at the results. Okay. So let's take a look at your results. And everybody said C. Very good. So I must have done a good job talking earlier in the session. So this is exactly right, and this is the type of question that you're likely to get. The business issue, the project goals are the most important things. Understanding this will give you a good foundation for starting the project. Okay, let's go back to the slides. And here's the next question here. Which of the following statements is true of modeling of a multi-server checkout line? So this is all about queuing theory. A queuing model can be used to estimate service rates, A. B, a queuing model can be used to estimate average arrival times. C, variability in arrival and service times will tend to play a critical role in congestion. And D, Poisson distributions are not relevant. And here I'll put up another vote. So select the right answer and go vote. Anybody else want to vote before I close the votes? Okay. All right, and most of you said C, variability in arrival and service times will tend to play a critical role, and that's correct. A couple of you said that a queuing model can be used to estimate average arrivals. So here's the answers to that one. And it is true that a queuing model can be, that a queuing model is important to do one of these things, but a queuing model doesn't do the average arrivals. Arrival times are inputs into a queuing model. So the right answer here is C. And most of you got that right, so very good. Those of you that didn't, take a little bit of time to review your queuing theory. Okay, I'm not going to go through all of these because I think you can do many of these on your own. The slides in this webinar will be up, and you can go back and go through these if you want. And all of these came from the booklet, so you actually can find these and play around with it. But let me go through one more just to give you the hang of the type of questions here. So we'll go to question 8 here. Okay. A segmentation of customers who shop at a retail store may be performed using which of the following methods? A, Monte Carlo Markov chain and ANOVA. B, clustering and control charts. C, decision tree and recursive function analysis. And D, clustering and decision trees. And again, we'll put up a vote. So read the question again and decide which one's the best answer. I'll give you another minute to do this. Now, I will say that when I was studying for this exam, a number of the questions come from areas that you may not be familiar with. I have never worked in retail. While I've done a lot of queuing models, I haven't done anything with regard to segmentation. So you will find that there are areas that you do have to bone up on because the test is designed to test a wide range of professionals, and you may have more of a specific focus to your professional life. Okay, so let's go look at the results here. You've got sort of a almost a tie here between B and D. B is clustering and control charts, and D is clustering and decision trees. So I guess everybody believes that clustering is important. And so then the question here is your knowledge around control charts and decision trees and how they might relate. So let's look at the next slide here. So B, around clustering control charts, a control chart is more of a statistical process control procedure. It's not used for retail, and it's not used for clustering. So, you know, in this case, you have to know, or either know or guess, that SPC doesn't relate to retail clustering. But decision trees certainly do work for doing customer segmentation, and so that turns out to be the right answer. And that's the kind of question that you will see on the test quite a bit, and it does require you to both know some material, but also to sort of think about the meaning of the question and the words that are used, because some of you may not have ever worked with control charts before. So, you know, you can think about that, and as you go through, you will find, I found that not all of the questions that were on the exam were questions that I was readily familiar with. Okay, so here's some bonus tips for taking the CAP exam. You know, this is your profession. Hopefully many of you have been involved in it for a number of years. You should have confidence in yourself. Sometimes you do have to take a deep breath and think about the problem and what the problem is stating. Sometimes there's some hints in the question or how the question is asked. Sometimes there's some words that are highlighted in bold. And if you do that, I'm confident that you'll do well on the test. Okay, with that, I'll take some more questions before we conclude. Any more questions? Okay, if there's no more questions, I'll turn you back over to Louise then.
Thank you, Frank. I really appreciate this. And I'd like you, the audience, to know that this presentation will be available after today. You can listen to it again at any time. And our next presentation will be next year in 2015. It will be on the data domain. The other two webinars will come every second week, every 2 weeks, and we expect to end this whole presentation series in February. Meantime, if you have any questions, do send them to me, certification@informs.org. And Frank, I noticed we have a few other questions. Somebody said, how do we see the questions you skipped? As I said, it will be, presentation will be available on this site after we finish, and you can look at all of the questions and you can see all of the answers to them.
There's also, I think all of the questions were pulled from the study guide or the handbook. Is that not right?
Yes, they were all taken from the handbook. We expect to have more practice questions within the next year. We simply have not had time to go ahead and develop a full-fledged practice test yet. But it's coming.
And then the next question that we received was, are there any online resources to practice questions? I don't know of any. I will take a look after this to see if there is some other site that has that kind of thing, specifically for the CAP exam. Now, there's a lot of stuff online that professors have put up with practice questions or final exam questions or things like that. But I don't know of any other online resource specifically focused on the CAP exam.
I don't know of one either, but as you mentioned, Frank, looking at some of the professors' questions and their exams is probably a good place to find out the wide range of material that's being covered.
And if you want to contact me directly, my email is F as in Frank, STEIN @us.ibm.com, and I will try to answer all the questions that I receive. And I guess one other thought is that what we covered today, I think, is fairly representative of the other domains as well in terms of the level of knowledge you need. The problems that are available on the website are similarly, representative. You will need to study areas where you feel you're weak. As I said, I thought I was weak in statistics, and I did need to spend some time boning up on that. Other people I know were concerned about their ability to do Bayesian probabilities. So if you don't remember Bayes' rule, you should certainly go back and practice some of that. And with that, thank you and good luck when you take the test. I've got one more vote for you, I believe, maybe two more. One more vote. Two more votes. Okay, here's the first one. Please key in your results here. Any other votes before I close the voting here? Okay. And some of you are more confident than others. Pretty uniform mix here. Any last votes before I close the voting on this? Okay, so the majority of you, or at least the largest number, was 90 to 100%, and 70 to 89%. So that's good. So, oh, we got another vote in there. Okay, so 70 to 89% is the largest one. And here's the last question for you. you recommend the CAP to your colleagues? Any votes? And some of you are saying maybe, so maybe that's, if I pass the test, then I'll recommend it to the rest of my colleagues. As I said, we here at IBM created a study group, and we all showed up en masse to take the test. I think we all did pretty well, so I would encourage you to not try to do this yourself, but to encourage others that you work with to do it too. And with that, we conclude this broadcast.
Thank you, everybody.